further up an organisational hierarchy you go, the more likely you will encounter narcissists, sociopaths or psychopaths. They could be your line manager, a peer, a subordinate, or a key stakeholder in any other team or department, a board member or investor. You may even have one or more in your social or familial circles. Regardless of where they sit in your life, you will benefit from learning how to spot and manage them, as you will likely have to deal with their manipulative and coercive behaviour from time to time, especially if they score high in associated traits. That said, you might find it surprising to know we can also learn a lot from them to improve our lives. To better understand narcissists, sociopaths and psychopaths, we will cover how each are created, why they are more the same than not in day-to-day life, even though their origins are different, and how to spot when one is attempting to undermine your endeavours. We will also dispel some media-driven myths by demonstrating how they can land on the side of the angels just as easily as the side of the demons. We will deconstruct real-life examples, some famous, with the help of academic behavioural models to answer 3 key questions. What are their similarities and differences? Revealing the correlation between origin and manifestation. What are their typical traits and behaviours? Revealing the correlation between temperament and success or failure. And what are their adversarial proclivities? Revealing a predictable pattern of vengeful behaviour when slighted. This is a model I created to demonstrate the correlation between traits in respect to each personality. I want to emphasise this is far from a detailed analysis and should be viewed solely as a beginner's guide. In the context of this case study, it offers a simple explanation as to why the terms narcissist, sociopath and psychopath are often used interchangeably. Their main commonality is narcissism, i.e. concern only for self. To quote Dr. 𝗪𝗵𝘁, clinical psychologist and professor of psychology at California State University, all sociopaths and psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are sociopaths or psychopaths. The reduced capacity or absence of empathy manifests as indifference to the needs of others. It's not so much that they don't care as much as they can't care. Their main differences are found in fear, remorse and conscience. Narcissists can experience these. Sociopaths, if they experience them, can suppress them, and psychopaths don't experience them. Non-psychopathic narcissism manifests as a result of a child being either undervalued, defined as a continually marginalised high performer that knows it, or overvalued, defined as a continually overpraised poor performer that knows it. Hence both are a product of low self-esteem, defined as thoughts of contempt for self accompanied by feelings of worthlessness. Sociopathy is an extension of being undervalued, as it comes with the additional hardships of psychological abuse and/or physical violence, hence a product of brutality. Psychopaths are born, hence a product of biology. However, as with narcissism and sociopathy, they still require environmental triggers to determine where they land between the angels and demons. In all 3 cases, the structure and/or function of the brain has been altered as a result of genetics, brain injury and/or environmental factors, in particular the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain responsible for processing empathy, compassion, guilt, morality and self-control. This also includes risk assessment and fear response as it regulates the amygdala. In the context of these personalities, these alterations result in a reduction or even elimination of the capacity to experience and regulate these emotions and executive functions. This insight allows us to begin joining the dots between each personality and their level of emotional regulation versus dysregulation, which indicates the terms regulation and dysregulation could be considered bookends on a continuum of some kind. If so, how do we assess and measure regulation versus dysregulation? If you're watching this video, then I suspect you're trying to learn how to solve a problem related to the topic. And by the end, I hope you get what you need. If you do, I have 3 simple asks in return. 1. If you find this case study useful, then give it a like so YouTube knows to share it with others. Or better yet, share it directly with someone who might also be dealing with this issue. 2. If you're a team leader, middle manager or senior leader banging off a glass ceiling because you are doing too much of your team's work, struggling to challenge and influence decisions, or unsure how to best implement some kind of transformation, be that digital, growth, finance, HR, etc., and you would benefit from relevant case studies, then subscribe to let me know. 3. If you learn something you can put into practice, then buy me a coffee to say thanks. Those that do get to ask questions on how to solve the short and long-term problems they face every day, with dominant themes being made into case studies. Link for that is in the description. Now, on with the show. I created this model based on the research of Dr. Kevin Dutton, Professor of Psychology at the University of Oxford, who has been studying psychopathy for over 40 years. He demonstrates that psychopathy is measured using a spectrum of traits, and the more traits you have, the higher you score. This echoes the work of Dr. 𝗪𝗵𝘁, a criminal psychologist and professor at the University of British Columbia, who invented the original diagnostic tool, the Psychopath checklist. At one end, we have conflict-averse personalities who tend to be care workers, nurses, therapists, craftspeople, teachers, charity workers, etc., typically considered the more selfless in society. At the other end, we have conflict-inclined personalities, such as antagonistic violent offenders, literally incapable of functioning in society without harm to self or others. In the middle, there is a sweet spot where a balance of traits, social integration, and professional success can be found. A collection of particular traits that combine to generate high performance. Some examples are disregard for social norms, low boredom threshold, thrill-seeking, no sense of consequence, mental toughness, resilience, calm under pressure, astute at reading others, persuasive, live in the moment, positive outlook, the list goes on. With the presence of such traits, it should become apparent as to why people with these traits end up in leadership roles. They have just the right number and combination of traits to be great leaders, especially when immersed in worst-case scenarios. Two specific examples that spring to mind are Christian Craighead, MBE, the British SAS operator that single-handedly stormed the Dusit D2 hotel in Nairobi, Kenya on the 15th of January 2019, and Kyle Morgan, the American Delta Force operator that single-handedly stormed the Radisson Blu Hotel in Bamako, Mali on the 20th of November 2015. Christian's involvement followed a terrorist attack by Al-Shabaab, a Sunni Islamic extremist group. Christian, who was in the area purely by chance, set off on his own with no intel and minimal equipment, repeatedly entering and exiting the complex to eliminate threats, escort civilians to safety, and coordinate local security services. By the end of the 18.5-hour incident, 5 terrorists were dead and 700 civilians had been rescued, for which Christian was awarded the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross. Kyle's involvement followed an attack by 𝗪𝗪𝘁, an African jihadist group. Kyle, who was also close by, set off on his own with minimal equipment, but with intel in the form of an ongoing telephone conversation with Americans trapped inside the hotel, whom he'd set out to rescue, eventually coordinating his efforts with local security services. By the end of the incident, both terrorists were dead and 150 hostages had been rescued, for which Kyle was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. While Christian and Kyle might be considered extreme examples to illustrate my point, their acts of valour are far from isolated. In fact, the military as a whole tends to attract people with many of the traits highlighted. Within the military, there are numerous voluntary selection processes unwittingly designed to seek out and capture those with specific combinations of psychopathic traits, each required to fulfil a specific unit's operational role. Commonly known examples from the UK are the Royal Marines, the Parachute Regiment, the Pathfinders, the SBS and the SAS. Commonly known examples from their American cousins are the USMC, Rangers, Special Forces, Navy SEALs, DevGRU and Delta. By now you are likely starting to put people you know in boxes, though do keep in mind this case study is not a diagnostic tool. To discover a friend, family member or colleague exhibits one or two narcissistic, sociopathic, psychopathic traits does not make them one of these personalities. We all, throughout our lives, exhibit one or more of these traits as part of the natural development of temperament, so nobody scores 0. To be diagnosed psychopathic on the 20-item checklist, you need to score a minimum of 30 out of 40 in the US or 25 out of 40 in the UK. And it's the outliers on the spectrum that become infamous. For example, Ted Bundy scored 34 out of 40. Now that we've covered some of the pros, let's investigate some of the cons. I'm referring to traits such as antagonism, deceit, manipulation, pathological lying, criminality, glibness, parasitic behaviour, failure to accept responsibility. This list also goes on. With all this in mind, what will you experience with someone further up the psychopathy spectrum, especially if you're considered an adversary? This is a model based on a decision matrix the US Navy SEALs use for leadership selection, which focuses on the relationship between performance, defined as a demonstration of technical skills, and trust, defined as a demonstration of values and principles. I've added 4 archetypes to offer a sense of who might manifest in each area. These 4 archetypes correlate with specific behaviours that can be measured in any individual, team or organisation. Bully. Results orientated, easily throws others under the bus in order to achieve their end in mind. Micromanager. Slows everyone down through relentless interference in everything everyone does. Puppet. A yes person, avoids challenge, making decisions and struggles to get anything meaningful done. Leader. Creates aspiration, defines the end in mind, encourages autonomy, resolves conflict, takes hits for the team. Given that manipulative, coercive and antagonistic behaviour is likely to present, especially further up the spectrum, if you are perceived as an adversary, it's most likely they will tip into bully by setting you up to fail, either overtly or covertly. Let's define what each type might consider an adversary. Narcissist. Publicly drawing attention to their failures, undermining their sense of greatness. Sociopath. Perceived to be backed into a corner and consider you a threat to their survival. Psychopath. You are an object standing between them and their overarching objective. A narcissist will most likely attempt to pin their failures on a scapegoat to avoid shame. The sociopath will most likely be threateningly assertive to make an example of you in front of others. The psychopath will most likely, metaphorically speaking, set you up with the rope to hang yourself as they just want you out the way. I've deliberately used sweeping statements in my descriptions to keep things simple. However, do keep in mind the degree to which they assert themselves will correlate with the specific combination and severity of traits they individually possess. Let me give you an example of narcissism, as this can apply to all 3. If you publicly challenge a narcissist on mistakes they've made or deadlines they've failed to meet, say in a meeting, even though you may have the best of intentions in terms of accountability and finding common ground, it's likely they will perceive this as a personal attack. Public perception is highly prized by a narcissist, and your actions are undermining their carefully crafted reputation by swaying public opinion. This manifests as shame, the narcissist's kryptonite, as public perception is now incongruent with how they want others to perceive them, which taps directly into their core of deep-seated low self-esteem. The most likely course of action a narcissist will take is to slowly convince you that your colleagues and peers are talking negatively about you behind your back. These claims will be false, with the sole intention of eroding your self-confidence and trust in those around you. The narcissist will then claim to be watching your back, encouraging you to build trust and reliance in them, a classic divide and conquer strategy. Not only does it distract from their failures, they get to restore their reputation by being perceived as the hero while keeping you on the back foot. I've witnessed a CEO do this with their entire board and put the company at genuine and significant financial risk in the process. The narcissistic need for reputation management far outweighed the need to ensure the business was financially stable. A famous example of this type of behaviour is the relationship between J. Robert Oppenheimer and Lewis Strauss, which played out in the film Oppenheimer through Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr. Oppenheimer made an innocuous quip about Strauss during a public hearing held by the General Advisory Committee for Atomic Energy in 1949. As a result, Strauss covertly plotted the downfall of Oppenheimer by ensuring the request to renew Oppenheimer's National Security Council security clearance was denied by the Atomic Energy Commission in 1954. This eliminated Oppenheimer's access to his life's work up to that point and almost ended his career. Strauss committed this Machiavellian act while publicly masquerading as Oppenheimer's greatest advocate for the intervening 5 years. Narcissism, sociopathy and psychopathy are not the same, are far from black and white, are neither wholly good or wholly bad, and all require some form of external trigger to determine where someone will land between the angels and demons. Narcissism, sociopathy and psychopathy exist on a spectrum, which we are all on as no one scores 0, with good or bad defined by the number and combination of traits present, and the context in which they are applied. Someone that scores high in narcissistic traits that considers you an adversary can work tirelessly to undermine your efforts without you ever being aware they are doing so. Much of what is said or written about narcissism, sociopathy and psychopathy is sensationalistic clickbait. Only the outliers on the spectrum become infamous. The rest go about their daily business as we all do. A famous example of this is Dr. James Fallon, neuroscientist and professor of psychiatry and neurobiology at the University of California, who was a control group participant in a blind study on Alzheimer's, through which he discovered, purely by chance, he had all the neurological and genetic hallmarks of a psychopath, yet lived a relatively normal life with a high degree of success in his chosen career. As the media tends to sensationally focus on the small number at the violent end of the spectrum, let's cover some examples of those on the side of the angels within the broader spectrum. Firefighters that run into burning buildings, police officers that protect us from harm on our streets, soldiers on the battlefield protecting our way of life, surgeons that perform life-saving operations, investigative journalists that work to uncover corruption and fraud, and lawyers that work tirelessly to ensure justice is served. These jobs actually require those in them to possess many of the traits listed earlier in order to develop the temperament needed to carry out the duties associated with the roles. To quote Dr. Kevin Dutton, "I've interviewed a lot of Special Forces troops, especially the British Special Air Service. That's a very good example of people who score pretty high in psychopathic traits who are actually in their perfect occupation." After watching this case study, it's entirely possible you have become aware you might be the subject of a narcissistic campaign at work. If so, then record and diarise every interaction. Times, dates, calls, Zoom, Teams, WhatsApp, text messages, emails, in-person interactions, and note any witnesses. Do this for every incident. Be sure to keep it all fact-based, including the context and outcomes of each encounter. You may need the evidence depending on how much they escalate. Covertly campaigning to have you fired or wear you down to resign is a very real possibility. I've witnessed this, having supported several senior leaders and freelancers to successfully navigate this psychological minefield. Now that you have a better understanding of the similarities and differences between narcissism, sociopathy and psychopathy, their traits, and that a good or bad combination is context dependent, and in many cases essential to be successful in a chosen endeavour, let's consider how you might use what you've learned. Are there particular traits you have identified that, if you dialed up or down, have potential to help you be a better version of yourself for your family, friends and or colleagues? If so, which traits in which contexts? Given the correlation between professions, traits and success, has this highlighted a mismatch between your temperament and your occupation? If so, which occupations do you think you would be better suited to, and how might you test that? Has someone sprung to mind in your family, social or professional circles you now need to change how you interact with, or even remove from one of these circles? If so, what is your first step to change things for the better? Remember my 3 simple asks near the beginning? So how did you get on? Did you find this case study useful? If yes, then do give it a like so YouTube knows to share it with others. Or, as I suggested earlier, share it directly with someone who is dealing with this issue. Do you want more relevant case studies like this? If yes, then subscribe to let me know. Did you learn something you can put into practice? If yes, then buy me a coffee to say thanks. Remember, those that do get to ask questions on how to solve the short and long-term problems they face every day, with dominant themes being made into case studies. Link in the description. Take your learning from this case study one step further and complete my case study review. Capture what you've learned and commit to the changes you deem relevant to your situation. A copy of your completed review will be emailed to you instantly. Link in the description. For further insight on dealing with a direct report, peer or line manager at work exhibiting severe narcissistic traits, then do watch How to Manage a Narcissist at Work. Link above my head. If you are a team leader, middle manager or senior leader that would benefit from support with this issue, then check out the tools on my website at 𝗪𝗺𝗺𝗫𝗺𝗺𝗺.co.uk. Links also in the description. Thanks for watching.